Welcome to Flipping Tables, where we bring all of our religious thinking to Jesus, who flips the table for his upside-down kingdom. I'm Julie Sexton, and I'll be your host.
Welcome to another episode of Flipping Tables, friends. My name is Twyla Brown, and I'm so excited for you to enjoy the conversation today. I'm going to share a little bit about some bird trauma that I had lived through earlier today, but no fear, it's turned out okay. And then we're going to have a really interesting conversation. We're going to talk about Jesus and his compassion for those on the outside, and specifically the man that he healed from leprosy. And then we're actually going to segue into a much more vulnerable part of conversation where we share a little bit about some of our personal experiences with our personal friends in the LGBTQ community. I hope you'll join us and that you'll have an open mind and feel filled up by this conversation. Well, welcome, friends. You have Twyla Brown here, along with Miss Julie Sexton and Kimberly Daniels.
Hello.
Hello, fresh off of a great weekend.
We had a big weekend.
We had fun together.
We sure
really
did.
Jealous and bitter because they were on childcare duty and they didn't get any of the delicious food that we'd prepared. Well, they did get some. They got some leftovers. Yeah,
Andrew got some.
But yeah, we had a big old time. We hosted our If Local. So you all have heard us talk about our wonderful trip to Dallas that we took back at the beginning of March. And so we decided that was so good. We couldn't not share that with people here. And I think secretly we all just wanted to rewatch it too.
100%.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It was, I found that it was every bit as good as when we were there in person in March. It wasn't like, oh yeah, I've already heard this. Every bit of it was just as good. And I had new takeaways. It hit me in different ways. So I thought, was that true for both of you?
Absolutely. And I know that one of the very first speakers at IF that evening was John Mark Comer. Mm-hmm. And I think I was a little bit starstruck. And we were there with all of our friends, and we were in this really big crowd, and so everything was so shiny, and I was a little distracted. Yeah. I took a lot of good notes for him, but I was so thankful for the opportunity to sit there and hear it again on Sunday, and I got new takeaways from it. Mm-hmm. It was so fresh, and I realized that so many of the things that I have done since March, like reading John Eldridge's book that we've talked about several times, they really complement each other.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so I was like, I was even better prepared for that message again. But all of them were as fresh as they were. So don't anyone ever, if you ever have the opportunity, friends, to do an If Local, whether with us or wherever you live, you need to do it.
Mm-hmm. It's so good.
You're not missing out by not being there.
No, not at all.
Of course, it's exciting to actually be there, but I felt like I absorbed the information better being at home.
Yeah. Did you have a favorite speaker or talk from this time?
Well, I teared up listening to Sadie Robertson.
Yeah, me too.
The second time too.
Yeah, I did too.
I loved her. I loved all of them.
I know.
Usually there's some that you're like, oh, I could take it or leave it, but
no,
they were all so good.
And it was just so interesting. Things that just went over my head or that I just didn't absorb the same the first time, hit me different this time in a great way. And I was like, this is just so good. I'm so glad we did this. And we had lots of sweet ladies with us that also I think really enjoyed it. A wide variety of ages and generations, which was awesome.
Yes.
And then of course we had amazing food because, well, we like to eat.
We do. We don't joke about food.
Okay, friends, I'm just going to tell you right now, maybe Julie can post this on our Flourish Instagram page or something, but she made the most out of this world appetizer that, for our next life group, I'm bringing this. But she did these little, crostini, toast pieces with, what was it? Whipped feta and honey?
No, it was whipped goat cheese.
Whipped goat cheese, sorry.
And honey with roasted grapes and thyme.
Oh my gosh. Was
Delicious.
it not a dream? It was amazing.
It was decadent.
It was better than dessert.
I think it was better than dessert.
It's all I can think about since Sunday.
And we cleared that platter.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And
it was for sure a crowd favorite.
I think so. I wish we'd have made more.
Oh my gosh.
So good.
So good.
But that was kind of like my little wink to Dallas, because that's where I kind of became obsessed with that chicken salad that had the roasted grapes in it.
Right.
And that was where I kind of got the inspiration, and I did it on my own and like put it together on a piece of keto toast. And I was like, this is delicious. And then I kind of like looked on Pinterest to see if there was an actual recipe. And that was the one I stumbled across, and it was so good. But you know, it was amazing to share that with our friends, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, to have people into Kimberly hosted us. Andrew took the boys and, you know, went other places with them. And it was amazing to have one of my daughters was there, one of her best friend was there, and then just some other ladies in our church and community. Actually, there was only one other lady who actually we attend local church with, so it was actually women from other churches and things, but it was so good and they were all excited. I think they were all interested in like, hey, what do we have to do to get to go next year? And we were like, well, it's, I think, full, but don't worry, there's opportunities for if local, and you know, we might be able to watch for random tickets or something to get you guys a ticket. But it was great. And so my daughter was really excited. She had never done it before. My other daughter had done an if local before. And so to see her, you know, have it for her first time and all the pages of notes that she took. And she stopped by our house that night and was telling her dad, you know, how much she had enjoyed it and how she can't wait to go with me, because I did buy her a ticket to go to Dallas next February. So don't miss the opportunity to do an if local.
So good. It is so good. And you know what is funny is, speaking of the food, somebody commented about, or maybe you were telling a story, I don't know. We were talking about how great the food was, and all the guests were talking about like how delicious it was. But then somehow there was overlap to the book club that you all have, because you also apparently put on this amazing spread for your book club. I have not been to the book club.
I mean, if we're going to get together, we're going to eat.
Right. Yeah. Do you all really spread it out like that even for book club?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I mean,
whether I hosted or she hosted, we both go all out with having a lovely brunch spread. And she did this amazing homemade granola.
Oh my goodness.
With, you made an apple compote.
Yeah, it was like chunky applesauce, homemade applesauce.
It was delicious. And then I took a frittata, and there was something else. Oh my gosh.
Yogurt.
The yogurt. No. The raspberry ricotta cake.
Oh, yeah. We really did bring it all out, didn't we?
So one of the girls was saying before, because we eat for about 30 minutes and just have conversation, and then we transition to our book time. And one of the girls said, I love you guys, and I would come for the book, but the food, like, you guys really spoil us. So in July, friends, if you're local, you do not want to miss our book club on Fridays. And
what are you guys going to be reading? Do you know yet?
Oh, we do, because they
they
requested that we read Don't Hold Back.
Oh, okay.
By David Platt.
Oh,
because they've heard us talk about it.
So I'm not a book club kind of girl, but I've already listened to the audio. So can I come and eat with you all?
Can I come and eat with you?
I mean,
yes,
technically, I've read the book.
Yes, you have. We've both read the book. So anyway,
I do want to listen to it again. I wish I had a paper copy. So maybe this will be my, you know, nudge to buy the paper copy, because there's so many notes and highlights I want to make in it. So
yeah. Well, we're going to do some fun things in July. We're going to have the Don't Hold Back book club, and then we're also going to do our gospel challenge. And that's where we would love for you, our listeners, to join us. And we are going to read the 4 gospels. I've put together a reading plan. We're going to start with Mark. We're going to read them in the order that we believe were written, and take 30 days, read 3 to 4 chapters a day. But we would love for you to join us, because all 3 of us are going to do it. And I think it's just going to be a good kind of mid-year summer reset.
Question for you, because I've not looked at your reading plan yet. So do we read one book at a time, or do you...
We're going to read one book at a time.
Okay. So
We'll
not
read
like
Mark.
not like what we've done with the Bible recap where we go like across all 4.
No, we won't. We
Okay.
won't read them that way. I actually prefer to read one whole book at a time.
I do too. So I'm glad that you said that.
Yeah. So the way I put it together is we're going to read Mark, then we're going to read Matthew, then Luke, and then John.
Okay.
Save the best for last.
Okay. Alrighty then.
Even though we're kind of crushing on Mark, and we've really enjoyed Mark.
I don't crush on Mark. I crush on his bestie.
Oh yes.
Yeah. Anyway.
Okay. Well, today we are still with Mark. And we are still in Mark chapter 1. Surprise, surprise. But this is the last episode in Mark 1. We are moving on. But today we are going to be talking about Jesus healing a man who had leprosy. And this healing made it to all 3 of the synoptic gospels. It's a headliner of a healing, because it spotlights Jesus' authority, power, and his intentions to bring cleansing to God's people. So some of the things that we know about lepers, we know that lepers were outcast, living in isolation, because leprosy was very contagious. A person with leprosy wasn't allowed within 6 feet of another person. After we've all lived through COVID, we kind of understand that.
We're like, we've heard that somewhere.
We heard that somewhere
Where
before.
did you get that 6-foot estimate?
Where did that come from? Maybe.
Biblical.
Yes. But they were not even able to be with their own family. They had to live on the outside of society, and this really added, I think, to their physical suffering.
Yeah.
Their only community was among other lepers. And this was a club that no one wanted to be in. I mean, because think about this. This is heartbreaking. When we had to go through like a little bit of isolation and a little bit of separation, there was like torture for a lot of us, especially social butterflies and people who are extroverted. These things, when I kind of just think about what their life was like, and I think one of the most heartbreaking facts is that if you had leprosy, you were viewed as someone who had been stricken by God. Like you had done something to deserve that.
Yeah. Didn't they go around saying they had to pronounce like unclean when they were around other people?
Yeah. And I think that would be so humiliating.
Yeah.
I mean, I can remember, being in the COVID time and we were all spaced out like in a grocery store with this big space between us. But can you imagine if you were sick or something and you had to like walk through like yelling out, COVID.
Well, no, I think about like, when our family did have COVID and how like shameful it felt to have to call people and be like, yeah, so we've tested positive for COVID. That first time, that we had it, it was still like people were just getting it for the first time, right? It still felt a little like taboo, like, oh, did you bring COVID to, the social gathering or whatever it was. And I remember having to call people and I felt so awful. And it was actually my daughter-in-law, Bella, was getting ready to start PA school. And I was scared to death because Avery, her husband, they'd been at our house few days before we had COVID. Avery did get COVID. I think they weren't married yet at this point. So he was fine. He isolated at his apartment. But I was scared to death because she had roommates too that were also starting PA school. And I was like, oh my gosh, we're going to ruin like the start of PA school for these girls. And luckily she didn't get it, but it was like a shameful thing to have to call people and say.
Right.
Yeah.
Like you did something wrong by getting it.
So I can only imagine what it would feel like to walk around having to say unclean because that felt like, embarrassing to just have to call and say, we have COVID and you were at our house. So.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And to know that this was a situation, I mean, you were going to get over COVID.
Right.
And you were going to move on after a period of isolation. But this was their sentence. And, when they, it's kind of like how we wore a mask, but they would put their hand over their upper lip and they had to cover their mouth when they even said the unclean. And so, again, I picture it kind of like how we've had the experience of living with a mask on. But these men and women who had leprosy, they were regarded as living corpses. This is a very ancient disease. It's one of the oldest recorded diseases. And God had given the Israelites very specific instructions on how to deal with leprosy and other skin infections. Those are the worst chapters to read in Leviticus, right? If you go through like a chronological plan or a read through the Bible plan and you read Leviticus, and those chapters, because there's so much detail and so many steps and all the things that they had to go through, and it's kind of gross, just from the medical aspect. But this is a very humbling, humiliating, hopeless, isolated life that lepers were living. There were also instructions about if anyone was suspected of having this disease, they had to go to a priest for examination. Again, I would think that would be sort of humiliating. And they also had to wear like torn, ragged clothes, and they had to have their hair, they had to keep it like unkempt, and all of these things were to make it obvious that they were sick and contagious, and everybody better stay away from them because you might catch it. And this disease was incurable by man. It was considered to be a grave form of impurity. Among the 61 defilements of ancient Jewish laws, leprosy was second only to a dead body in seriousness. And when you think about it, it's like they're living dead. Leprosy is talked a lot about in Scripture. And one of the main reasons is that leprosy is a graphic illustration of sin's destructive power. Leprosy was a powerful object lesson of the debilitating influence of sin in a person's life. And when you think about that, that just, again, adds more of a weight to what a terrible diagnosis this was, what a sentence it was, and that people viewed you as must have done something horrible, and God had struck you down with this, and then probably rabbis are using it as a illustration of sin's power, this destructive nature to it. So I mentioned already that Matthew, Mark, and Luke all record this miracle of Jesus healing a man with leprosy. And something Mark does is he uses a shocking word to describe Jesus' response to the man. He says Jesus was indignant. This was after the man asked him if he would heal him. And Matthew and Luke, they don't do that. They drop it, and they just choose to, when they record the story, they record it in a way to emphasize Jesus's compassionate response to the man instead. And there's a lot of opinions and speculations. I've read a whole bunch of things about as to why Mark uses this word. And the one I lean toward is that Jesus is indignant towards our suffering. Not the person, but indignant towards what sin cost us. Or in this case, what living in a fallen world where there are diseases, where there are consequences to living in a broken, imperfect world, which affects our quality of life.
I like that explanation.
I mean, because it can come across harsh if you read it and you're just like, why would Jesus say, or why would Mark say that Jesus was indignant? Like, what does that exactly mean?
Right, because we know he came for the sick. Yeah. So that wouldn't make sense that he was indignant that the man was coming to him.
Right. He was approachable. That is in the NIV, the way it translates it. But tonight, I'm going to use the Message translation because I feel like it just reads a little more conversational in this account. And so I'm going to read Mark 1:40 through 45. A leper came to him, begging on his knees, "If you want to, you can cleanse me." Deeply moved, Jesus put out his hand, touched him, and said, "I want to. Be clean." Then and there, the leprosy was gone, his skin smooth and healthy. Jesus dismissed him with strict orders. "Say nothing to anyone. Take the offering for cleansing that Moses prescribed and present yourself to the priest." This will validate your healing to the people." But as soon as the man was out of earshot, he told everyone he met what had happened, spreading the news all over town. So Jesus kept to out-of-the-way places, no longer able to move freely in and out of the city. But people found him and came from all over. I wonder when Peter told this story to Mark, if he said something like, "Mark, I was so close to him. I could feel his temperature rise. He looked at this man with compassion, but he was indignant about the way he had been suffering." And that's the way I think about it. That's why I lean towards that explanation of, you know how when you're around someone and you can tell when something is just like piercing them, or just, you feel that righteous indignation kind of rise up in them. Jesus loves us. And to see people suffer the way this man was, and for him to come so humbly before the Lord and say, "If you want to, you can cleanse me." And Jesus was deeply moved, so moved that Jesus touched him while he was still sick and contagious. And think about that. He had not been touched for a long time. Jesus touched him before he healed him. God's heart is moved by our wounds and moved by our pain. And I just wonder what that must have felt like to him. To feel someone else's skin on his broken, diseased, this disease disfigured, and, something that people had ran from. Jesus just walked up to him and touched him. Friends, we all need the touch of Jesus before we can be healed. And Jesus tells him, he says, "Go to the priest so that the priest can validate that you've been healed." And this would be his way to re-enter his community with his family, his friends. He would be able to go to synagogue. He would be able to go to work. He would be able to go home. If he had a wife and children, he would be able to hold his wife and his children again. He was no longer living among the dead, the living dead, I should say. He had to be so excited that he couldn't help but tell everyone what Jesus had done for him. Jesus asked him to keep his healing quiet so that his mission wouldn't be impeded. Because his mission was to preach the kingdom of God has come near. Repent and believe the good news. But with this man being so excited, he kind of, put Jesus in a difficult position where now everybody's going to be wanting to come to Jesus for healing and for that touch. And this was going to, create some problems. He just wanted the man to go and tell the priest. And telling the priest did a couple of things. It shows that Jesus respects the law and that Jesus does what only God could do: heal leprosy. Man could not heal leprosy. This was an act of God. And it also told the priest that Jesus had touched an unclean man. And so this was going to bring religious criticism. Never mind that if you can heal leprosy, you're probably not going to catch it. Which, again, that makes us chuckle a little bit, doesn't it? Because just the thought of that, they should have been overjoyed, the religious leaders. They should have been, ecstatic that something like this had happened on their watch. And, there should have been great rejoicing. But again, all of this attention meant Jesus was going to have to stay out in the lonely places. As the message says, the out-of-the-way places, because of all the people who were trying to get to him. The man had gained freedom from isolation, but he put Jesus in a position where he had to stay more isolated just so that he could get rest.
Yeah, I love that Jesus healed him in spite of the cost. Now, I want you to think about a group of people who live on the edges or outside of the church, people who have a hard time feeling welcome in the church community. This could be lots of groups, so if this is how you feel and you're not a part of the LGBTQ community, stick with us.
Yeah, I told both of you that the Lord was nudging me to bring this to the table for discussion. Because I think that both of you know, and maybe some of our listeners do, that through the years, we've had a number of people live with us for short periods of time. And it's usually just for a few months. They were, people who were in a transition, or they just needed a little short-term help. And interestingly, some of them were a part of the LGBTQ community. They were all Christians, and were all trying to resist their same-sex attraction. And I want to talk about one of them in particular, because she was my friend. I met her in my church, and we had grown up in the same religious background. And I remember when she was baptized, I think that might have been like one of the first times we had ever had a conversation. Even though we had grown up in like the same kind of religious system, this same kind of church, she went to one in a different part of the state, and she had moved into the Lexington area and was living with her mom. I thought she was living with her mom because she came to church with her mom. But I remember talking to her and introducing myself, and actually it became like the start of a friendship. And it actually was more like a discipleship relationship. She would come over to my house, and we would spend time talking about our lives, and we would do Bible study together and so forth. And one day when she came over, I remember she was a little nervous, and I could tell that she had something that was on her mind. And I remember like she was sitting on the couch and I was sitting in a chair, and she was shaking, and she was just having a really hard time getting her words out. And I remember like it just happened, but I just leaned over and I looked at her and I said, it's okay. I already know that you're gay. And now she was speechless for another reason. She didn't know what to say or how to respond. She's like, how did you know? And I just said, I just told her there were some clues and some things, a way that she talked about her roommate and stuff that I just kind of like started putting the pieces together. And so I had it figured out, but it didn't change anything. I just still, she was my friend. Mm-hmm. And I think I probably suspected it before we had become friends. And this actually moved us into a season of having even more real conversations, because she wanted to be free of the same-sex attraction. And she believed what God's word said, and she made some hard choices over the next few months and so forth to move forward in obedience to God's word. She did move in with us for a period of time to separate from her partner. And actually her partner was a great lady. She actually wanted a new start too. And they just needed some kind of separation between the two of them. They were very codependent on each other. And so eventually, I know her partner went on and married and had a child. And actually, she came to a few Bible studies that I hosted in my home. So I had both of them there, because even though they weren't in a relationship anymore, they were still, they still cared very deeply about each other and, wanted the best for each other. And so my friend had invited her friend to come to Bible study, and we did things like that. And but eventually we even we studied systematic theology together. We took like 6 or 7 months and read through this entire book and studied it. And I watched my friend seek and pursue God. And she was so smart, and she was very, she was curious, and I never saw her be mad at God or put blame on anyone for the choices that she made, or felt like there was some underlying reason that caused her to struggle with this. And she didn't ask those questions. I saw her moving forward and so forth. But she lived with us again for a few months, but then eventually, she moved out. She lived on her own, and then she went to college. She decided to go back to college, and then she moved to another part of the state, and we kind of lost contact with each other. And I would hear from her on occasion, and I would reach out to her through the years just to, see how she was or things like that. But again, sometimes I would get a message back and sometimes I wouldn't. But last year, a mutual contact that we knew, someone that she had introduced us to as a friend of hers, reached out to my daughter on social media and told my daughter that she had died. And I'm
sorry.
It was so sad. Like, I could, because she's not very old. I mean, I don't even think she was 40. I guess she was 40, early 40s or something. But anyway, she was young. Yeah. And I don't know why she died. I don't know what happened to her. I did find out eventually that she apparently was living in Arizona. But again, I wasn't able to find out what happened to her. And I asked my daughter, I was like, will you reach out to that person again and see if, just, for some closure or something? You know how we need closure on things. After, we lost contact, I have no idea whether she continued living in obedience by denying the desires of her flesh. I never had any reason to doubt her salvation. Yeah. Whether she lived in complete freedom or whether she struggled until her death with same-sex attraction, I don't know. God knows, and I trust Him. But she was my friend, and I loved her. She was not a project to me. I accepted her. I prayed for her. I treated her the same way I treated anybody else that I was in a relationship with, and she treated me the same way. I mean, she was holding me accountable for my struggles. My struggles with sin were different than hers, but I needed that accountability and encouragement to be obedient to God rather than, to continue to gratify the desires of my sin nature. Because we know sanctification, it takes our entire lives. It's not a race. Sometimes some people, progress faster than others. We have different struggles, and I don't think it's a good idea for us to compare our struggles. No. Or something like that. But
what's hard for you is not hard for me, maybe, and vice versa.
Yeah. Yeah. It usually doesn't work good to be in an accountability kind of discipleship relationship if you're both struggling with the same thing. Right?
You're letting, our issues with sugar. We can let each other off the hook really quick and easy. But I know what you mean. What's hard for you is maybe not hard for the next person. And we all have something, though, that hangs us up.
One thing I know, when she and I were separated over that period of time, I know that she would have had a better chance if she was in Christian community who accepted her and loved her and, held her accountable and held her up. And I really hope that she had that. But I don't know, because I don't have closure, and I don't know what was the cause of her death, but I also don't know how she continued to live her life. Yeah. And I just thought that this might be a good conversation to have on the heels of talking about Jesus healing the leper, because I feel like sometimes in the church that we can treat people like they have some kind of disease or something, and we just can't leave anybody on the outside expecting them to get their lives together.
No.
Because that's what religion tells us to do.
Yeah. I mean, Jesus touched the guy.
Right.
You know? Yeah. We have to touch these people.
Yeah, and you have to share space and invite them in.
Yeah. You have to touch people.
I think a lot of people get hung up on in the church about if we open the door widely to people who are in the LGBTQ community, that means that we're affirming. I never affirmed my friend and told her, that's okay. I never did that. But I accepted her, and I sat there with her, and we were friends for months and months before this, before she felt comfortable enough with me to talk about this. And so she knew that I accepted her into my home, and I think she kept my kids, and she was just our friend. So friends, the reason we're having this conversation is we can't treat people like they're lepers. We can't leave them on the outside to get their lives together on their own. That's what religious people do. We don't want to be religious. We want to be like Jesus. We want to bring the outsiders in, give them community, speak the truth in love. You want to see people. You want to listen to them. Listening, it's so important to listen to people's stories and their struggles, no matter whether it's on this topic or whatever it is. You have to see people and show them compassion. Everyone should be welcome at our tables. The church can't affirm homosexuality, but the church can't ignore it either. And I think I get frustrated there. I get frustrated when we avoid it. We try not to talk about it. We have to offer welcoming space into our communities for people to work out their salvation. That applies to everybody.
For sure.
Everybody across the board should be welcomed by Christians into the house of God.
Absolutely.
I like what you said, how everyone should be welcome at our tables, because as you were talking, and it was evident just by your story, that it's when we're in relationship with people and one-on-one around a table or sitting on a couch, that's when walls come down, you know? I mean, I think that's why we have food at all our gatherings, right?
Yeah.
When you're living in community with people, that's when you can be vulnerable and intimate and really talk to people from your heart. Because I think of people that I know who may have assumptions about how the church sees them. But when they're in my home, I think they feel really welcome. I mean, I don't want to speak for people, but I don't stop you at the door and say, you can't come in here if you're gay. You know, that's just not how we do it.
No.
You're welcome in. You come sit down and you eat with us. And that's how we live our life. And that's how walls are broken down around the table.
It is.
You know, it makes me think, sadly, I do have a lot of gay friends, not a lot, but I have, a number of gay friends. And, during COVID, our life group is mostly in my neighborhood anyway. And so we really, we gathered a lot, just, whether it was cookouts or sometimes it was, driveway church or whatever it might be. But anyway, we decided like we were going to have like a block party with the couple across the street because we wanted to get to know all of our neighbors better. And so we put invitations on specific, doors that were like right around us. And one of the neighbor houses in our, little area happens to be a gay couple, and they came. And as we talked through the evening, because it always had just been pleasantries of like, hi, how are you today? Or like, your yard looks nice or whatever. But as we got to talk that evening and just spend time eating food together and just hanging out and, cornhole and whatever, they became more comfortable in just talking and sharing, and actually said, we were really nervous about coming. Because Twyla, we looked at your Facebook page and we know that you're a Christian, and we were afraid that we wouldn't really be welcome. It broke my heart. It was the most profound thing. And after they left that evening, I sat there and I talked with my neighbors who I was co-hosting with that are in our life group. And we were like, wow, the courage that it took them to come because they knew that we were Christians and they were afraid. Like, do they really want us to come over and hang out with them and their kids?
Well, they probably didn't know what you were going to say.
Yeah. And we love them. They come to all of our neighborhood outings. We love them so much. We celebrate Christmas with them. And
didn't you do a progressive dinner and things with them?
I mean, like literally very intimate. It was only like a handful of families. So like they were part of that Christmas, progressive evening that we did. But it broke my heart, and we sat there, me and the other couple, after everybody left that night, and we're just kind of talking. We were both like, wow, like hearts just broken that they would feel nervous or like we wouldn't really want them or that we wouldn't want to, hang out with them with our families. And it was very eye-opening for me.
It was really eye-opening sitting there with my friend who I'd been in this friendship with. And to see her so nervous, because she just thought I was going to reject her.
Yeah.
She just thought I was going to be like, okay, we're done.
Yeah.
And if you could have just seen her face when I just leaned forward and was like, I already know. This isn't an issue. This isn't an issue for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, just creating spaces where people are welcome. And I think the church, we need to do a better job of training people, discipling them to want to be like this, to want to do that. I know lots of Christians who are like this, who are friendly and welcoming and not,
It's about living in the tension.
Right. Well, and I think that some of us who have grown up in the church have been trained to be like, if you spend time with them, then you're affirming that.
Yeah, I've heard that so much.
And it's table flipping for us, but you can't read the Bible and not see that Jesus spent time with people on the outside.
Yeah. Yeah.
You just can't. And you can love God's word and believe God's word and love people, and those two things can exist at the same time.
Yeah.
They're not juxtaposed.
Yeah. And I think it's important for us to remember that we're all sinners and that we're all struggling with sin.
Yeah.
And there are sins that we are much more comfortable with that we make like it's a joke. Like we make jokes about obesity.
Yeah.
Things like that.
Shopping addictions.
We act like that's not as big of a deal.
Yeah.
There are certain things, and so I don't know why we're like that. Why we try to it's like it's a human thing, right?
I was going to say it's human nature.
It's just human nature
to compare and to be like, well, I'm not as bad as they are.
That's what religion does.
Right.
Yeah. Religion says, well, this and that, and religion divides and puts things open. We will be surprised. My friend, I was talking to her friend today. I was telling her that I was, going to have this conversation with you guys tonight. And she said, it's going to be so interesting. We will be surprised by who was the wheat and who were the tares. And I thought, that is so true. That is so true. I mean, Judas was at the table with Jesus. And he even asked that night, it's not me, Lord. Is it I? Is it I?
And Jesus washed his feet anyway.
Yeah. I mean, we have got to be welcoming and treat sin as sin and not to let these things divide us. I know that there's so many parts to this conversation that we could have, and I just wanted to talk about my personal experience. Twyla, I appreciate you sharing your experience with your neighbors, and it's hard to talk about.
Be willing to have community with people who are not like you.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's the sweetest gift you can give yourself, I would say.
Because we're all incomplete.
Yeah.
And when I was telling my friend that I was going to have this conversation, she sent me this text, and I said, that's really good. She said, conversations are always great. When I used to talk about relationships to my discipleship group, they would ask me, are they seeking? Are you witnessing? Have they left their old life yet? And she said, I'm like, my love is not dependent on whether they get it together. My love is simply to let them know whether they choose Jesus or not, I'm still going to listen. I'm still going to provide tangible help for their human needs. I'm always ready to talk about Jesus, but I'm not going to sell him. I'm going to be Jesus with skin on so they might tangibly know him. God is so good to show us what love actually requires in each authentic, long-term, unconditional relationship.
That is so good.
I love that. And I love that about her. I know that she is a person who welcomes everybody to her table.
Yeah.
She does a Friendsgiving, and she invites, and she tells people know that you're going to be at a table with people who may be struggling with a whole variety, with alcohol, with overeating, some sort of sexual sin, something that she said there's usually someone who's still working in the sex industry at my table. She said, and you know what? That's not on the table. No one knows who these people are and what's going on in their lives. We're just there, people enjoying a meal together.
Yeah.
And
that's really sweet.
Yeah. So maybe it would be, because I do think it takes a lot of courage for people to show up to church. So a good starting place for us is to just practice hospitality.
Yeah.
And eat meals with people and get to know people. And then if they like hanging out with you and they express an interest in coming to your church, but be willing to accept them no matter what they choose to do with their lives. It's good. So important.
That's good. Wow. Well, this was definitely a great conversation, and I hope that people listened open-minded and process it. But thanks for bringing all that to the table today, Julie.
It was a little heavy.
It was, but I appreciate it. It's not an easy thing to bring to the table. It's sticky. So anyway, let's talk about bright spots as we wrap up. What are your bright spots, girls?
Well, I told you guys in a previous episode that I had went to lunch with my friend, and we had planned on seeing a movie that day. But the movie was actually not showing. It was like a misprint. It was not a misprint. It was just on the... I I'm not even sure what happened. We showed up to the theater and they were like, well, there's a lot of people showing up here to see that movie, but it's not actually playing. And so she asked me on Friday, she said, do you want to try again? They say that it's showing on Saturday morning at 11:30. And I was like, sure, let's do it. I'm not going to be defeated by this. So we did. We ended up being the only two people in the theater to see this movie. No wonder the poor movie wasn't showing the week before. It was just a quirky little movie. It was called, I don't even remember what it's called. What was it called? Oh, You Hurt My Feelings. It had Julia Louis-Dreyfus in it, and it was just kind of a quirky little movie. And the two of us, we just sat there and watched this movie, but we could talk to each other freely, and we just had such a fun time. And so it was just it was fun to get to spend time with her 2 weekends in a row on a little fun friend date, and that was fun.
Good. What about you, Kimberly?
Well, it wasn't super hot today. So the boys and I rode our bikes over to the park and played at the park for a while and then rode our bikes home. And that was the first time that we had ever done that. And it was just a lot of fun. It was sweet because right now my big boys want to do one thing and then my little guy wants to do something else, so I feel like I've been pulled in different directions.
I feel your pain.
Yeah. So
Y'all are in the same boat.
yeah, so it was just really sweet to go. And then the big boys were the ones that like ran up and down the stairs to the slide, and it was like, oh, I can just stand here and watch you guys. There was a lot. It was just sweet. I always love watching my big boys interact with my little guy because they're just so sweet with him. So it was a lot of fun for me. I said that it was forced family fun because my oldest hates riding his bike, but I'm sorry, you have to go.
We're going.
Yeah.
Get on your bike, we're going.
And it's my bright spot.
right.
That's so funny.
It was just sweet.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
My bright spot also was kind of a kid outing. We went to the pool a couple days ago, and it was great weather, and Theo was like coming up kind of during COVID, right? So we didn't go to a lot of places, and like I think the only pool really he's been to is like the one at the YMCA, like which is actually indoor, where we do like swim lessons and stuff. But we went to the Woodland Park pool.
Oh, they just revamped
and they just like put in the new pirate ship thing in the middle. I mean, he had so much fun. Now, okay, like the big boy did not like hang out with him and babysit him. I was literally, because we'd taken Finn's little best buddy Martin with us, so they went off and did big boy things, and so it was me like being Theo's playmate. Plus, you have to like supervise, closely in a pool. Yeah. But it was so fun to like see just like the joy and excitement in him to be at a public pool and like to be playing on this like pool pirate ship thing, and it was just really sweet, and we had a nice time, and the weather was great, and so it was a fun time.
Just the simple things.
I was thinking about the poor little guy kind of like grew up in isolation.
I know.
There in the beginning,
I know. Some of those things like were missed in the first few years.
And your family moved during COVID. Like on the end of it,
right? So
and so like this was kind of a new thing for you guys to like go to this park, riding your bikes together. So, wow.
Yeah.
Just to have had a conversation about isolation, and then all of our things bright spots were about, spending time together.
Yeah.
And so, friends, we just pray that this conversation enriches your day when you listen to it. And we just want you to keep following the table flipper and leave the table flipping to Jesus.